Hello everybody. This is the first webinar out of the series of the Media Education Lab that features all our scholar students with their research about media literacy. So to open today, we have Elizaveta Friesem, our research assistant at the Media Education Lab, also a graduate student, PhD candidate at Temple University, and she will introduce her dissertation research. So, Elizaveta, all yours.
Oh, you didn't say about the presentation.
Yeah, so you can explain.
Okay, so I'm going to explain. So first of all, thank you for introducing me. Thanks everybody for joining my presentation today. I have created slides to accompany my presentation, but the slides are on Yonti's computer, so I won't be able to share them on the big screen. You will see the slides on one of the little windows, right, Yonti? That's how
Yep.
it will happen.
On my computer.
Yeah, and at some points you will see them on the big screen when Yonti is talking. But I won't see the slides, only you will see the slides?
No, everybody will see. Here, I'm going to share now, and here we go. So...
Okay, and do people need to click on the...
So the people who are on the Google Hangout can click on my square, and then it will be on the big screen. And the people in the recording, when I'm talking, it will be on the big screen, but they can look down and they'll see those slides.
Okay, so so just before I start the actual presentation, I want to say that since I know that there are some people, or maybe a lot of people, listening to the presentation who are not familiar with my field, I decided not to make it too heavily theoretical, and I'm not going to go, for example, in details talking about theory behind media representations of gender. There's a lot of theory that informed my research, but I want to make this presentation as accessible as possible for everybody. But in the Q&A session, you are more than welcome to ask me questions, and later on also I'll be happy to talk to you in more detail about the all the theory and maybe more detailed methods that informed my research. All right, so now we can actually start with the presentation. Oh, Marquetta. So
first slide is on.
Because I don't see it. I see you.
You can see you see me?
I see you.
Oh, really? You don't see the share the screen?
No. I see you, the same thing. Okay, now it's something else.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me fix that. Oh, okay, here we are. Share screen. Whoop, that's a nice.
So.
Now?
Yay, I can see that.
Okay.
Hello, Marquetta. Hey, Marquetta.
Hey, guys.
Nice to see you. Oh my God. All right, we'll talk later. But it's very good to see you. All right, so the name of my presentation is, you can see, Teaching About Gender Representation in High School. And in this first slides, you can see a character from the award-winning Amazon show Transparent, which I really recommend you to watch if you haven't done yet. It's really cool. It follows a transgender woman who is navigating relationship with her family and her new life as in a new capacity, in a new gender. So I chose this picture for the first slide for several reasons. First of all, it shows that media representations of gender are definitely evolving. they are becoming more complex. They are pushing the envelope. They are challenging our understanding of gender and gender stereotypes, which is really cool. And the fact that the actor who played this transgender woman, Jeffrey Tambor, the fact that he received the Golden Globe Award for Best Actor, I think it also shows that the industry is embracing these more complex representations. However, before we become too enthusiastic about this whole thing, we should remember that this show was created and produced on Amazon, which is not a public network, right? So these representations definitely exist, but they are still very much marginalized. Plus, yes, they exist, but so does transphobia, so do crimes against trans people, and so we shouldn't stop talking about gender issues, and we shouldn't think that because these kind of representations exist that people have become totally open-minded about what gender is and what gender binary is. So my presentation is titled Teaching About Gender Representations in High School. So I talked a little bit about representations, and now let's go to teaching. And now let's move to the second slide. So I have said that we still need to go a long way to raise awareness about complexities of gender. So we know that there is all kinds of hate crimes because of people's misunderstanding of what gender is, because of their fear and prejudice. We know about transphobia and homophobia. We know about all sorts of stereotypes that limit people's ability to be who they are because of a gender that they chose or the gender that was chosen for them. So there are a lot of inequalities and pressures that affect people's lives. And as I said, the fact that media representations might be pushing an envelope doesn't mean that things are getting really better in the world outside of the medium. So I argue that one of the ways to deal with all these problems is education. To put it simply, if we want people to be more open-minded about what gender is, to go beyond problematic assumptions and prejudice about gender, we should start with children, right? And I understand that for some people this statement might raise red flags because it might sound like, oh, she's going after children, it's like propaganda, she's going to brainwash them and tell them that all these weird people are normal, you know. So I want to explain that it's not about propaganda, it's about teaching children to, or teaching young people to think critically about what gender is in their own identity and in the world around them. So we definitely should remember that saying to a little boy something like, you shouldn't play with a doll because others will laugh at you, that you shouldn't do that, it's like a no-no. But at the same time, you shouldn't go to and of course you should stop bullying. You should work with people who engage in bullying, but you shouldn't just go out preaching to other boys and saying like, if they haven't really engaged in bullying yet, saying like, you have these bad stereotypes, let's talk about that. You shouldn't have them. So education in this sense should be about engaging children in a discussion and asking them, how do you understand gender stereotypes? Maybe not necessarily using the word stereotypes if they don't know it yet. So teasing out what they know about gender stereotypes, what they think about men and women, and what do they think that gender stereotypes can hurt people, etc. So it's definitely not about, it's education not in the sense of here are some facts about gender, learn them and go and be a good person, but in a sense of developing critical thinking skills. Teaching children and young people to question their biases and see the complexity of gender. And here we can move to the third slide. Here comes in media education. So my research is about a specific kind of education, about media literacy education. So it wouldn't be a surprise for anybody if I say that media texts surround us. We are every day we're exposed to films, books, TV shows, magazines, websites, social networks. Unless we live on an island, we are bombarded by these media texts. And all media texts, I mean the majority of media texts, tell us in one way or another something about people or relationships between them. Even if we look at animated films about animals, they are actually about people, right? So if you look at The Lion King, for example, it's not about wildlife. It's about quest for power. It's about coming of age, about love, relationship, a lot about gender as well. So in ads, in websites, we can see in one way or another people being represented. And so we learn from the media, or we reflect further on what it means to be in the world as a human being. And because as human beings we still largely see each other as gendered, it is one of the key categories of our identity that we, when we think about ourselves, we think about our gender, and when we think about others, we think about other people's gender. So because it is such a key element of our identity, of our life, when we look at media texts, we also think about gender, and we learn about gender from this media text. And since, unfortunately, prejudice and assumptions about gender that create expectations and limitations for people still exist in our society, and as I already said, they exist despite the fact that some more progressive media representations emerge. So this prejudice and these assumptions, they are reflected in media texts. And we can discuss a lot what comes first. Either it's a media text that creates prejudice, or it's a prejudice that is reflected in media text. And I'm not going to go too deep into that right now, but it's enough to say at this point that I believe that discussing media texts, because they are so full of, messages about people and relationships about between people and about gender, that it's really productive to have young people, children, critically engage with these representations, analyze them, and think what are they telling us about gender, what are they telling us about ourselves. So these are very important discussions that we must have with our children. And media literacy education offers us a great space for these kind of discussions, and offers us a model to have this kind of discussions, because it allows us to think of media texts, how they are constructed, why they are constructed in a certain way, what messages they contain, what messages, how these messages can affect our lives or not affect our lives, or affect the lives of other people. So, and also media literacy education is an amazing tool, because it allows us to talk with young people about very serious issues like gender, using media texts that they know they like, right, and sometimes they really love, so they can connect with these media texts, and it's fun for them to discuss it. It's much more interesting for them than talking about theory, like what is gender, what is gender binary. That's boring for them. But if you show them the text, if you show them The Lion King, and start asking them questions like, what do you see there? What kind of relationships do you see there between characters that are coded as male and characters that are coded as female? And what do you see? Do you see any parallels between that and what you see in your life, and what does it mean, and what are there any stereotypes there, and what can the stereotypes tell us about the world around us? So on the next slide, that I borrowed from Professor Renee Hobbs, one of the major media literacy education scholars and practitioners, you can see 5 elements of media literacy model that Renee Hobbs discusses in detail in her book, Digital Media Literacy. So I believe that all these 5 elements are crucial in helping young people and children understand the complexity of media representations of gender and reflect on what role these representations play in their lives, or how they can maybe create their own representations that reflect their understanding of gender and relationships between people based on their gender. So these 5 elements are in the following order: access, analyze, create, reflect, and act. And you can see that media literacy education is not just about analyzing texts, right? It's not about critically analyzing, picking apart the text and say, oh, so that's what it means, and that's how it's connected to the world outside of the media. No, it's also about learning to find information from different sources, compare sources, use media tools, which is access. It is about helping young people and children to create their own media messages, which allows them to think about the way mainstream media messages are constructed, and also allows them to express their own voices, express their own opinions. Then it is about reflection on young people, so when people reflect on their own media use and think of how media text can influence their lives. It is about understanding of the importance of social action, which I think is, for me, is probably the key element of this model, because in the end, the goal is to make the world a better place, right? We have inequalities, we have all these problems and prejudice, and we want to get rid of them, basically. We want people to live in a more equal, just society. And so young people should be able not only to analyze media text and see, okay, so these are maybe some problematic ideas in this text, but also think, how can I use this knowledge, how can I use this understanding that I gained through discussing this media text, how can I use this knowledge to go out into my community and maybe share it with other people, or maybe change my own behavior, or create a media text that will help promote these goals and make the world, improve the world, make the world a better place. So that's why I really like this model. So now let's move to the next slide. And that was a really long introduction. Just to summarize, I wanted to say that through this introduction, I wanted my listeners to understand that the key idea is that media representations reflect the way gender is understood by many people in our culture, in Western culture. These media representations exist, and they are a part of our culture. They reflect people's beliefs, and they might also reinforce these beliefs, right, and attitudes. And by analyzing these representations, we can help young people expand their understanding of what gender is, and to think about gender inequalities and stereotypes, and to think about ways of how can one overcome these stereotypes, how one can basically make the world a better place. So that's all theory, and that sounds great, right? Like, we deconstruct Lion King in the classroom, students are excited, enlightened, their minds are open, they go to the world, and they fight gender inequalities. So that's theory, and that sounds beautiful, right? But what actually happens, and that was my question when I approached this project, is, so what exactly happens in the classroom where teachers discuss with students media representations of gender? And I don't talk specifically about media literacy education classrooms, because some people, and actually a lot of people who discuss media representations of gender in their classrooms, do not necessarily identify themselves as media literacy educators. And that actually was the case with the 2 teachers that I worked with heavily for my dissertation. So I wanted to go to the real classroom and see what's going on there. And I started my research with this very open question, like, what's going on in this classroom? But I also had more specific interests. Like, I wanted to see how students may resist to this kind of messages, because I assume that if teachers try to you know, to show students that they have certain misperceptions about gender or certain stereotypes, that students can be resistant to these messages. And we should remember that talking about gender is not a neutral conversation. It's not a conversation like 2 + 2 = 4, which is a neutral, let's say, fact, right? Nobody is going to be offended by the fact that 2 + 2 is 4. But if you say, oh, you know that, you know, boys are doing things that like oppress girls, and then boys will be offended because they feel like, oh, I'm oppressing girls and I don't want to oppress girls. So or some values of feminism, human rights, somebody can relate to that, and somebody can feel that it's not, doesn't really relate to them, and they feel that they are being preached to about something they don't care about. So I wanted to see what happens in this classroom, how teachers talk about these issues, how students react to that, and if some resistance happens, how teachers deal with it. So the next slide, I want to introduce a little vignette that that is not from my dissertation project. It is a situation that I experienced at a conference before I started gathering data for my dissertation. It's just an interesting vignette that shows how complicated the reality of a classroom where discussions about gender are taking place. So I was at the conference and I listened to a presentation where the professor was talking of how she is teaching her students about gender issues and how it can be sometimes very problematic and it can breed a lot of conflict. And as an example, she talked about one student who was really resistant, who was not getting her message, and she gave him a bad grade because he was clearly like not getting her message, and he wrote an essay and she really didn't like it, and he was so angry at her and he basically shouted at her in the classroom. So things got really ugly. So I listened to that. Okay, and then after the presentation, I came to her and I asked her because I wanted to understand, so what really happened there? Why she thought that the student is not getting it, and why was he so angry? I asked her why the student received a bad grade, and she said, well, obviously he wasn't getting it because he wrote in his paper, he wrote exactly what I was saying. So he clearly was like repeating that because he wanted me to give him a good grade. So he was like regurgitating, and he was not putting his thought into that. So of course I was not there in that classroom, and that was just a very short conversation. But I was, my interpretation was that maybe this teacher misunderstood the student. Maybe the student really, maybe before that he was resistant in class, but then in this paper he wrote, I mean, actually he wrote exactly what she wanted him to say. So it shows a really complicated relationship, like what teachers think or educators think resistance is in this kind of classes, how students might show when they're getting the material, when they are not getting the material, and how teachers are navigating this kind of difficult and challenging discussions. So this story, of course, strengthened my curiosity even further, and several months after that, I started collecting data for my dissertation in the school that I here call West Cityville High School. And in all the in my dissertation, all the names that I'm using are pseudonyms for the purpose of anonymity. So this school I called West Cityville High School. And I also must mention real quick, you can go to the next slide, that why I chose to work with high school. The idea was that, yes, these conversations happen sometimes in colleges, I mean, conversations about media and gender, but not everybody goes to college, right? So the earlier these conversations happen, the better. So it means that we'll be able to reach more people, and that's why but at the same time, if you go too early, if you go to elementary school, even to middle school, for some parents that might raise red flags because gender is still connected in some people's minds very heavily with sexuality. So if you talk about gender, like what are we going to change my child's gender, you know, don't talk about that with them. So it's easier to have these conversations in high school. And my case study, I conducted it in high school, and I also had additional interviews with 4 teachers to contextualize the case study. And all these interviews also were in high school. So it's, I mean, I bet there are these conversations happening earlier in school, but high school is more real. It's more realistic to find it there. So that's why I went to high school. And in West Cityville High School, I found 2 great teachers who I call Michael and Rosie, who were really eager to help me with my research. And I used qualitative methods for this research, and a case study approach. So I focused a lot on what was going on in this one high school in 3 classes taught by these 2 teachers. And I went to the school 17 times throughout the 2-month-long quarter, and each time I spent from 4 to 7 hours in the school. I observed the classroom. I talked a lot with teachers. I talked with the students. I interviewed students. I interviewed teachers. I had, so in these 3 classes there were around 60 students altogether, and I interviewed 41 students in groups of 3. And in every group I asked students 2 sets of questions. I'm sorry, not in every group, but I had 2 sets of questions. So I was initially going to have interviews before the units that I was going to observe and after the units, but of course things didn't happen exactly as I planned, as it always happens, as it goes in with qualitative research. So I was interviewing actually throughout the quarter, and I was pulling out students from the classes that I was observing. So I used the first set of questions in the beginning of the quarter, and then the last set of questions I started using towards the middle of the quarter. And the first set of questions helped me better understand how what students think about gender stereotypes and stereotypes in general. So it was more like to probe what they know at this point about gender in the media, what they think about gender in general, and gender outside of the media as well. And the second set of questions was intended to help me understand what students are learning from these classes that I'm observing, what is their perception of these classes, and just in general, how they are. I wanted to hear how they are describing what's going on in the classroom. I wanted to hear their perspective. So, and also I collected data to contextualize my case study, because I wanted to see that the data that I'm finding in West Cityville High School is not like a crazy outlier. So it has connection to what's going on in other places, in other schools. So I talked to 4 teachers in 4 other high schools, teachers who in one way or another talk to students about media representations of gender. And I interviewed additional students in West Cityville High School who were not taking classes that I was observing, also to hear from them what is their perspective when they are not taking these classes. And I analyzed some lesson plans available online, also media and gender lesson plans. So now we can go to the next slide. The next slide illustrates the approach that the teachers that I worked with in West Cityville High School chose. They didn't use that much the media literacy model. They were heavily using the model of critical pedagogy. And their main goal was to help students use what they called critical lenses, and hence that's why I'm chose this slide with glasses. Critical lenses that help students see media texts and also the world around them in this critical way. So critical lenses is basically means different critical theories or schools of critical thought. For example, there was a Marxist lens that helped students think about, or was intended to help students think about, power relationships. There was a feminist/gender lens that was supposed to help students think about gender inequalities and stereotypes. There was a historical lens that was about thinking how there can be some historical inconsistencies in media texts and where that comes from, what that might mean. Like, for example, I'm going to talk more about it, but just an example of this use of historical lenses, that students watched the Pocahontas, Disney movie Pocahontas, and they thought, what's the connection between what we know, the historical facts, and what this movie is showing, and why is it showing it this way? Why they introduced the love affair between Pocahontas and John Smith, for example, while in reality, as far as we know, there was no love story at all. So then there was also archetypal lens that was supposed to help students see the symbols and repeating patterns, like the fact that one of the archetypes that they heavily discussed was the death rebirth like pattern, when a character is kind of symbolically dying before changing and seeing the world in a new way. So altogether there were 6 lenses, but feminist / gender lens was one that was discussed the most and that was used the most, and since they were talking a lot about media texts, so that altogether gave me an opportunity to claim that this is, this might not be called, this students or teachers might not call it media literacy education, but and discussions of media representations of gender, but actually it has a lot to do with it, and that's why it gave me an opportunity to learn more about what happens in this kind of classrooms. So on the next slide, I put pictures that illustrate the 3 main activities that happened during this 1 quarter that I was when I was observing these 3 classes. So, well, there were a lot of different things going on in these classes. There were discussions, there was a lot of journaling when teachers asked students to reflect on something and write about it and then share with the class. There were some like debates but the key activities of this quarter were the following activities. First of all, they watched Toy Story. They watched Toy Story, and that was the time when Michael and Rosie helped students to deconstruct this text using the critical lenses. It was the stage of modeling. They picked it apart, and they said, well, look, for example, here Buzz and Woody are fighting, so what does it tell us about masculinity? Why these male characters, when they're have a conflict, they don't sit and talk, they start fighting immediately or doing mean things to each other. And then they were discussing the character Bo Peep, that's like this beautiful lady with sheep, and they were telling, well, think about her, why, she's so pretty, but she's not really doing anything in this show, she's just being pretty, and once some problem is coming up, men are coming in to save everybody, and not a female character. Female characters are not saving anybody. Then there was a discussion about archetypes and a little bit about history, though not heavily about history. So a lot of these lenses were discussed. Then on the next stage, and it differed in different classes. So on the next stage, in some classes, students did something that was called hacked ads exercise. And this is why I put this picture in the middle. That's kind of like a take on a Calvin Klein ad for the perfume obsession, but actually it is, if you look at it, it is a critical commentary about anorexia. So the teachers showed this as an example, and they said that to students that you are going to have some kind of magazine covers or ads cut out from magazines, and you will need to play with them to create a collage, to create a critical commentary using all the knowledge that you gained by analyzing text through critical lenses. And then the other main main activity was watching Pocahontas, which I already mentioned, and also discussing it through the critical lenses. But this time, teachers stepped away and they allowed students to pick this text apart on their own, and students wrote an essay about it. So as you can see, media analysis was really a focus in this class. There were some elements of, in the model that I talked about, of access, some moments of create. You can see that hacking ads and creating collages was, in a way, media production, in a way. Then there were some elements of, what else is there? So some discussions a little bit about ACT, becoming responsible social actors, but still it was heavily about media analysis. All right, so the next slide shows, now I can actually go into the themes, what I found as I collected all my data and I analyzed the interviews with students, the interviews with teachers, I looked through, also what I didn't mention is that I looked through portfolios that students were creating, and that's where they put their hacked ads, that's where they had their journals, so I learned also a lot from that. So then I gathered all this data, and I looked at it again and again and again, and after all this analysis, I started noticing the themes that were coming up, and these themes are that I'm going to talk in more detail now for the rest of the presentation is half-changed minds, agenda setting, changing and becoming agents of social change, honoring students' interpretations, and resistance versus apathy. So let's go to the next slide that shows us my first theme, half-changed minds. So this is probably one of the most interesting things that I found, and something that I was not expecting, something that I was not thinking about as I approached this study. At the same time, it was really fascinating to observe, and that's an example of what happens when you come to doing a research with with some ideas of what you might see, but also with a very open mind and ask a lot of questions, not knowing what you might find out. So what do I mean by that, half-changed minds? As I was talking to students, as I was observing them in the classroom, I started noticing weird contradictions. And first I was just brushed them off and I said, I don't know, it's something like it's weird, doesn't make sense, I don't understand that. But then they were piling up, these contradictions, and I felt that this is something that I definitely must address. So what is this contradiction? On the one hand, I could see that students were really, like most students, they embraced the values of gender equality. They talked about that as that, yes, that's important. People should be equal. Some said that they are already almost equal. Others said, well, they are not equal, but they definitely must be equal. This is something that came up again and again. And teachers didn't really have to push, didn't have to convince students. Nobody said, like, no, men must be, breadwinners and women should be in the kitchen only. No, they said, no, people should go, women should go out and be business women, and men should be like have emotions. So it's all very important. Cool. So But at the same time, I could see again and again some little things that students said or did that showed that they might not either necessarily understand still what gender equality is, so they just say like, yay, gender equality, but they don't understand what it is. Or they think, like some people did, that, yeah, gender equality is really important, but it has been already achieved, so now we just should maintain it. No, it's not a problem anymore. We've done it, yay. There were some students who talked very passionately about some biases and stereotypes, but they would say things that would show that they actually themselves might have some biases that they probably are not aware of, because they just, like 5 minutes ago, they talked about how these biases are bad. So just in examples, a couple of examples. There was one student who was a great student, one of the probably best students in these classes, who was really getting teacher's message about all these gender stereotypes and women's rights, and he was learning a lot, and he was really open-minded, and he was saying like, yeah, of course everybody must be equal, and then he started to talk about his grandparents, and he said like, yeah, well, it's terrible. I see every time when I go to see my grandparents that my grandmother is cooking and doing everything, and my grandfather is just sitting and like she serves him basically. And then he said, well, it should be changed. Well, men should help. That's what he said. And I thought like to myself, okay, that might be like a slip of a tongue or something. But then I thought more about it, and actually falls very neatly into discussions that happen in scholarships that shows that in families where men and women try to share responsibilities, men are very much seen as just helping women. They are not expected to really like share 50-50, but just help. And when they help, they are seen as this wonderful men who are so good, and they help their wives. And for women, what they're doing is seen as, well, they must do it since they are women. So even without thinking, he actually reproduced this stereotype, although he was super into these discussions, and I could see how he was excited and how he was very sincere when he was talking about that he believed that gender equality must happen. Then there was another girl who was also probably one of the most active, like I would say she assumed a very feminist stance immediately once these classes started, and she learned a lot from the teachers, and she was also talking very passionately about gender equality. And then she said something like, well, I think that the gender inequality exists only because there are some differences that are built up through generations, because we know that men went hunting and women were like in the kitchen, so there's something happened. And so she was kind of reinforcing this actually gender difference and talking about gender inequalities as something that's biological, although she was so super passionate about the fact that gender inequalities must be abolished. And there were a lot of examples like that. There were, like, I'm not going to give you everything, but sometimes it just felt like a slip of a tongue, like a bad wording. But as I heard more and more and more of that, I started to feel that, no, something's really going on there. And then I remembered about a great book that I read by an Australian scholar, Cordelia Fine, that's called Delusions of Gender. And in this book, she talks about our world as a half-changed world that kind of accepted values of equality, but at the same time harbors all these problematic biases that make inequalities still a reality. And people in this half-changed world, she says, have these half-changed minds that, on the one hand, they have, they understand the importance of having gender equality, but at the same time, they have these hidden biases, often hidden from themselves, that make them say things that are actually terribly against gender equality, and show that they don't necessarily understand how they themselves are contributing to gender inequality with things that they are doing. And I really like this term, half-changed minds and half-changed world, better than in terms of gender, understanding of gender. Some people talk about post-feminist era as the time when people think that feminist fight has already been want, so we don't need to go further. So it's a similar thing, but I like talking about half-changed world, because it's actually much broader. It's a world where such things as social justice, equality, diversity are things that are repeated as something like, yeah, it's very important, we must do that. And people are actively trying to establish that. And the things where being racist or sexist or homophobic is considered bad, you shouldn't be that. But at the same time, in many cases, we can see that people are being racist and sexist, even when they're actively saying that, oh, I'm not racist. No, I'm just saying that because, you know, that's how I feel. So, and there is a lot of very interesting research that I'm not going to go into here in detail about something that's called implicit attitudes. And that sometimes that people that are very open-minded, that really sincerely want to be open-minded, they have these implicit attitudes, that's these hidden biases that actually guide their actions and make their actions sometimes sexist and sometimes racist and sometimes homophobic without them even thinking that that's what might happen. So in case of the students, I actually saw that something that's really fell into this very neatly into this you know, category of half-changed minds. And the very interesting thing that all the teachers that I talked to, both teachers in the West Cityville High School and the 4 other teachers that I interviewed for contextualizing the study, it felt like they didn't think about this complexity. For them, because I talked specifically a lot with the teachers about their perception of students' resistance. How they understand resistance, how do they understand that students get what they want them to get. And teachers see it in a very kind of black and white picture, that see that either students don't like the message, or they're just being oppositional and they resist, or they get it, or they get the message. And then if they get the message, you most probably can see that because of the way they act, and they're very enthusiastic, and they say it in their own words. Or there can be third option that some teachers mentioned, that students can kind of pretend that they got the message if they want to get a good grade, but they do it consciously. So they know that they don't get the message, but they pretend. So it's still kind of either they get or they don't get, black and white. And teachers did not talk about this complexity, that students can actually think they understand, and can actually really want to understand, and understand it on some level, but on another level still have these hidden biases that prevent them from really understanding what gender inequality means and how to reach gender equality. So that was half-changed minds. The next theme that I found was agenda setting, and I put this sign here to show alertness, right? So agenda setting, I use this term to show that the classes that I observed helped students to be more alert about gender stereotypes in the media, and think more about these stereotypes, and connect them sometimes to some inequalities that they might have experienced, or some inequalities that they might have heard of. So in this sense, these classes did a really good job, because I could see students coming from home after the weekend and saying, some students, not everybody, but some would say, oh my God, I've seen this commercial, and that's what I saw there. There's the stereotypes, and I didn't see them before, and I cannot unsee it now that I see it every time I see the stereotypes. Then students wanted to notice more, and they even sometimes intentionally watched shows that they already seen before, just watch it again, because they wanted to discover these stereotypes, and they wanted to think further about it. So these classes, I use the term agenda setting to show that these classes brought the importance to think about gender stereotypes and gender inequalities to the front of the students' minds. Now, there are some limitations to that, as I noticed, because the stereotypes that were discussed in these classes were mostly the same kinds of stereotypes, like that women are weaker, are shown as weaker than men, and men are shown as saving women, and women are shown as, you know, more interested in their appearance, and men are shown as breadwinners, and women are in the kitchen with children. So these things were repeated again and again, and I could see the students are really getting it and finding more and more examples of that. But the complexity of stereotypes was not discussed really, and the complexity of media representations was not discussed, and that's why I was concerned the students could see the same stereotypes again and again, but won't go further than that. There was one exception that that made me really happy. One student that I already talked about, that was a female student who was so excited about gender, all these discussions, and learned a lot about gender stereotypes. She as they were working on the hacked ads exercise, and they looked through a number of magazines for men and for women, she, on her own, completely on her own, she made a discovery that actually is discussed in academic literature. There are like articles written about that, but she noticed that on her own. She said, oh wow, why is it in female magazines all the time women are told how to be pretty for a man, like how to please a man, like, you know, do this, how to keep a relationship. But when in men's magazines, there's like, men are not told how to please a woman. Just say, you know, they're just having fun, like, you know, oh, sports, or cars, oh, pretty women. So why is that? So she didn't, of course, go like deep into analysis, textual analysis on that, but she noticed that. And that was an exception, because most of the discussions, as I said, happened around, oh, men are shown as strong and women are shown as weak, etc. So the next slide, going to the next slide, I want to talk about next theme that I found. Is I call it changing and becoming agents of social change. So I talked a little bit about changing. I saw students changing in a way that they started noticing these things, even though sometimes they mostly didn't go into much depth on that. And as I started collecting data, I was actually I wasn't sure that I would be able to see any change, because I was not approaching this project as a evaluation, like curriculum evaluation, to see what happens as students are taking these classes. But then I was fortunate when I was interviewing students outside of the classes that I observed. I talked to 11 students who had taken these classes already a year or two ago, and of these students, the majority still remembered a lot, and they were really excited still. And of course, you should factor in, you know, the environment, the situation in which these conversations happen, because you know, on their own, maybe they won't come up with so many details and remember so much, but as they were talking in a group, they really reconstructed what happened in these classes, and they talked about the lenses, and they talked about how they still notice the stereotypes and still use critical lenses to deconstruct texts and still see gender stereotypes. So change does happen, maybe not in every case, because there were some students who had taken these classes a year or two ago, but they were not really, they were not sure what happened there, and they said, yeah, we talked a little bit about gender, but I don't really remember. So change does happen, at least in case of some students. But what was even more important for me is the effect that some students, in a way, became agents of social change without even teachers really talking to them about it. So what I noticed is what it came up again and again in my discussions with students, and also when I was talking with teachers outside of the case studies, they mentioned also experiencing that, is students talking of how they, after these classes, they are so excited that they go and talk to their friends, or they go and talk to their family about that, and they basically even teach them to deconstruct media text using these lenses, and they talk a lot about gender too. So all those students did that, maybe not consciously wanting to be agents of social change and change, like make the world a better place, but they did that, and that shows that they have this potential. After, when they are fired up with these discussions, when they're so excited by these conversations, they can go and they can inform their communities about what they learned. And this is also a limitation that I saw in the classes that I observed, is that social change, being agents of social change, was not really discussed. And I just recently read an article that was talking about how a group of girls was discussing media presentations of gender and feminism in media texts, and about their misunderstanding of what social change is. And they said, these girls said that, oh, well, I won't go to the streets and like participate in protests and I don't burn my bras. Well, they didn't say exactly that, but so social change for many people is still seen as being like this active go demonstrate and fight police. So this is a misconception that must be dealt with in the classroom, and students must understand that going out and talking with their communities, or creating a blog where they express their ideas, what they learned, or maybe creating a little short video, putting on YouTube, starting a vlog, or starting a Kickstarter campaign. All of these are different ways to engage in social change. So, but that was not what I observed. I observed the students being I feel like being ready. Some of the students, maybe not even 50%, but there were students who were ready to go out and engage into some action. So teachers need to take that into consideration and really help students to understand how they can do it more effectively. So the next slide, I would like to talk a little bit about something that I call honoring students' interpretations, and I put this Rorschach test here to show, to guide you to think more about how many different interpretations you can make of things around you, right? And media text in particular. And I didn't go into too much detail as I was discussing my theoretical background, but actually scholarship on media representations and scholarship on media audiences talks a lot about how diverse media uses and interpretations of media texts can be. And it's very important to acknowledge that audiences are not fooled, they are not duped by the media, they are not just this zombified. When they see that violence happens, they don't go immediately and cause violence in the world around them. When they see like something that maybe for somebody is sexist, they don't become necessarily sexist immediately. They might interpret it in a very different way, and they can interpret that and criticize that and be empowered by that and go out and create some positive change. So but what I could see in these classes that I observed is that the teachers were very concerned about what kind of representation students were making, and they want them to make very specific interpretations of media text. They wanted them to see these very problematic texts that are filled with stereotypes. And I could see why teachers were doing that. They really wanted to protect students from all these ideologies that surround them in their everyday life. Harmful and problematic ideologies, which I agree certainly surround us, but what concerned me is that students didn't get that much opportunity to express their own opinions about what they make of media text that surround us. So they started very quickly repeating things that teachers were saying, and they did a very good job sometimes recognizing similar stereotypes in other media texts, but they didn't necessarily go too much further than that. And that's, I see it as a problem, because yes, we can argue about media presentations forever. We can talk about, for example, Lara Croft, and we can say, oh well, she's sexualized, she's objectified, is clearly oppressing women. But then maybe some woman who grew up in a very conservative family, she will look at this representation and she will be empowered by that, and she will say, oh wow, I can actually enjoy my sexuality and enjoy showing my body and enjoy showing that I'm beautiful and being active. And for this person, that can be empowering. Yes, it can be also still reinforcing certain biases, but it can be very empowering as well. So in this sense, teachers should pay more attention to what students say about their relationship with media text for two reasons. First of all, if we really want students to be lifelong learners and independent thinkers, which is a major goal of media literacy education, we should help them, navigate this space of media text on their own and not just scaffold them, give them interpretations and say, oh, this is what it means, and this is what you should see there, and this is what you should be aware of, because this is not how it works. When students are going out of the classroom, we are going to see again these same stereotypes, but they are not necessarily going to go further than that, and that's what I saw during my observations. And another very important reason is actually connected to the half-changed mind situation that I talked about before. So if we want to really understand how half-changed minds work and how students can be have these really progressive ideas, but at the same time these very serious biases, we should really listen to students and hear what they are saying in order to hear these inconsistencies and not shut them down immediately as they say something that doesn't jive with our understanding of what gender equality is, but really let them speak and gradually maybe show them, reveal to them that maybe there's some things that are inconsistent in what you're saying. Why do you think is that? Not in a way like, oh, it's terrible, you should think in a different way immediately. So these are two very important reasons why we should honor students' interpretations and hear very attentively to their voices. And the last theme on the next slide is what I call resistance versus apathy. So as I told you already, I approached this project as I really wanted to see how students react to these classes and to learn how they resist to these classes and what teachers make of this resistance, how they interpret this resistance, how they deal with this resistance. So what I could see is that yes, there certainly were students who were resisting in the sense that they were arguing with teachers, and they were not saying, nobody was saying that as I already mentioned, nobody was saying that gender equality is not important, but they were saying things like, yeah, but it's already been reached, so and women already have, like two boys told me during the interview, oh, women have more rights than men already, they should stop. I could see that students were sometimes openly resisting in this sense, but at the same time I could see teachers at some points misinterpreting this resistance. For example, in some cases, when I talk to students, I could see, when I talk to students in person, when I talk to them as part of focus group, I could see that they are actually really enjoying the classes, and they are agreeing with teachers on many levels. But because of this, and this is when the half-changed minds come in, because they have these hidden biases, they did have this, misunderstandings that they wanted to share with teachers, and teachers sometimes oftentimes instead of just letting students speak out and share these things and deal with these inconsistencies, they very quickly shut them down because they felt that here are the problematic ideologies are coming up and we need to say this is bad. You shouldn't say that. If you say that this woman is not sexualized in the cover, you are wrong because she's clearly sexualized. But I could see that resistance comes from very many different reasons. So that, yes, it can sometimes be because students really don't care, and that's where it connects to apathy, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. Sometimes resistance happens because the students have their own interpretations and they just want to share them, and teachers see that as really problematic, as transgressive, as subversive. And I could see sometimes teachers losing really good teachable moments because they didn't allow students to have this kind of comments. For example, during one of the discussions, one of the teachers, Michael, he showed students a cover of Cosmopolitan magazine, and with a beautiful model with a cleavage and like a tight dress and everything, and he started saying like, look, she's sexualized here, so it's clearly bad, it's wrong. And one of the students said, I read somewhere that actually men look at women's faces first and not at their bodies, which I thought is a really kind of weird comment, but also very interesting. So that could have started really interesting discussions, like, so do you think that they only look at their faces, they never look at their bodies, like, or where did you find, it could also have started a discussion of using media sources, like where did you, like, let's discuss, where did you read that, and not in a threatening way, like, that is a bad thing, don't read that, but trying to understand what sources students use to create their understanding of gender equality, gender inequality, gender stereotypes, etc. But the teacher saw it as a very transgressive, very bad comment, and he immediately shut it down. There were sometimes students who just liked arguing, like that was their way to learn. Like I talked with two students who said, I always argue, and that's how, and that's how I interact with people. Not argue like in a terrible way, but just like ask them questions, like, are you sure? I don't think that it's so. Maybe it's different. There were also students who just had some problems at home, and they were just, in a bad mood, and that's why they were resistant. But teachers really didn't like students' resistance and really wanted to minimize it, which I saw as problematic, because I saw that resistance, in many of the situations, resistance was actually a way of learning, or students of expressing themselves. And when teachers shut it down, they stopped this, they prevented this dialogue from happening and having this very productive discussion with students. I saw that during my observations, I saw that much worse than resistance is apathy, is when students don't care about it, and they don't say, it's not my problem, or they say, oh, gender equality is like, yeah, it's important, but it's been already, it's here already. We like why would we talk about it? Or students, they didn't necessarily say explicitly, like, I don't care, but I could see that in some students' behavior. For example, there was one student, girl who was very, I could see that she is a privileged student, because she was really, really beautiful girl, really popular girl. You could see that she's popular. She had a boyfriend in this class, another very beautiful, like very good-looking, popular boy. So she is Caucasian. So she's probably looks from a good, well-off family. So for her, these discussions about feminism and like women should have more rights, it was not really like, it didn't seem that important for her. And when they were working, she and her boyfriend, they were working together on the hacked ad exercise. And so what they did, they had a cover with a picture of Bradley Cooper on it. So what they did, they cut out his head and they put it on a female body. And I asked them, what's the logic here? And the girl, she said, I don't even know. Like, I don't know why we're doing that. But later on, what's really important is that later on, when they were presenting that, they connected it to gender equality. They said, yeah, actually, this picture shows that men and women are equal. So you can see how they are trying to embrace these values. They see that it's important to talk about gender equality. Well, in some cases, students might misunderstand what gender equality is. In other cases, they can just use it as a buzzword because they know that that's what teacher wants to hear. And these students didn't really seem to care that much about these conversations, because they had their own world. They felt privileged. They didn't think that's their problem. All right, so the next slide and final slide, yay, is about future directions of my research. So I mean, when I approached this research, I didn't know anything. I didn't think yet about you know, half-changed minds, and I didn't think about how this how this kind of classes can be evaluated. And now I learned, as I told you already, that the theme that comes up again and again is student talking about how they cannot unsee the things that the teachers told them about, and students talking about how they go out into the world and share their knowledge. So one of the future directions is I would like to have a larger, maybe quantitative study with a larger sample of students taking similar classes to see how pervasive it is, this kind of reaction, you know, that if we can actually measure the success of these classes, because that would be awesome. This is like a big thing in media literacy education, how we can measure the success of media literacy classes. Then I definitely want to go deeper into the half-changed mind situation and talk, learn more about students' hidden biases and how they are manifested, and also think about creating some activities that would specifically, like classroom activities, that would specifically help students to better understand their biases. Not in a way like saying, oh, you have a bias, you need to realize that, but in a very subtle way. How would you bring it up, and how would you, you know, how would you discuss that? Learning, I would like to learn more about resistance. Like these presentations, I really only scratched the surface of that. I learned much more about students' resistance and heard really interesting stories and of students who resisted, trying to understand them. So I want to go deeper into that. And of course, I would like to work with other teachers, because so far it was, you know, the case study focused on these two teachers heavily, and that was great. That was really interesting for me, really informative. But of course, you know, case study, its limitation is that it's it's more difficult to generalize because it's just one specific situation. All right, wow, and I almost talked to 1 hour and 15 minutes. Who would think that I would do that? All right, so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for this great presentation. I don't know if anybody in the panel here would like to ask a question. So we're open to question now.
Hi.
Hey.
Who has questions? Did someone talk?
I talked
So
too long.
Marketa, do you have any questions?
Okay, I have a few questions, but I'll ask one and see if anyone has other questions, and then if not, we can
Okay.
go back to my questions.
Deal.
Okay, first of all, really well done on your research. It seems really interesting. I really enjoyed the talk. I think you have done an amazing job, and you have really interesting findings that you seem you can really use for your dissertation, but also go behind and use them in the future research. So well done. Thumbs up.
Yay, thank you.
Okay, I had, like, maybe they are not exactly, well, one question is connected to your research, because you have talked about archetypes and preferences we can perceive the world. So I was thinking if you directly directly used Carl Jung in your research, or if you just talk in general about archetypes.
Well, thanks for the great question. I definitely see where it's coming from, because archetypes is such a huge topic. In this specific research, I was focusing on among all the lenses that the teachers use in the classroom. I focused on feminist/gender lens, and archetypal lens is something that they used in the classroom, and I talk about it in my research, but I don't focus on that much. I just show that as one of explaining one of the lenses that they use. And the teachers in the classroom, they did not talk about Jung, or I mean, maybe they mentioned it at some point when I was not in the class, but they really, you know, like for example, in case of the Marxist lens, they really tied it to Marxism. They said like Marxist lens, but in this case, they talk about archetypal. They didn't talk about Jung and all this stuff.
Great. Can I ask another question, or should I give space?
No, sure.
Okay, then When you talk about not children, that's because of my research, children. So you young people, the young people that the education should draw upon their own interests and own relationship with media, and that they were actually repeating what the teachers were saying. I was wondering if the teachers themselves at some point reflected on their understanding of gender and the issues and the media's role in that, or if you felt that they were actually drawing upon public discourse, using the myths about what's the role of media, or if they really took time to reflect themselves.
That's a good question, and this is something that I talk in more detail in the dissertation itself. So the teachers, they did reflect on their own connection with media stereotypes and media and gender in general, and like issues of gender. And I think that was one of their ways to connect with students, is to show that it affects them as well. And in this sense, yeah, I felt that the teachers were told some personal stories about, like the female teacher Rosie, for example, told how she was, how she felt bad about her nose when she was younger, and she almost did like a nose job, but she changed her mind. So that was an example when she was telling like how she was affected by not only by bullying in her school, but also by the portrayals of this perfect femininity, and that was her way of saying like that's how I dealt with it, and you should also not let it affect you. And the second half of your question, what was it, like whether they join a public?
Like the typical public discourse blaming media for the issues in society, for example, about gender or media. So if you saw this, because you saw that the students were actually, using what the teacher said, or actually talking about stereotypes without realizing. And if the same case was maybe about teachers, but like kind of stereotyping media.
Yeah, well, so in this sense, I thought that the teachers took a really protectionist approach and very along the media effects kind of, line, because they were all the time talking like, yeah, media have this terrible, problematic messages and all these ideologies that you must see, and that was their like spiel. They were saying, these lenses help you to see these ideologies. They set you free. They empower you. They liberate you, because you are not going to be influenced by these ideologies anymore.
Yeah. Great.
Hey.
So anyone else? If not, I'll ask the third one, but I'll wait.
Dara was typing that she has a question, but she needs to type it. So Marketa, if you can ask your third question. Oh, here okay, so Marketa, ask your question, and I'll see if Dara is writing us in the chat a question.
Okay. So my last question is not connected to your PhD research, but it's connected to your expertise in gender and media. So I've recently observed, from only my point of view, I haven't read any research about it or didn't focus on it specifically, but I see quite a shift right now that women are actually really having a new role, especially in the children's media, for example, Frozen. Or actually, I just yesterday saw The Big Six, and when one of the characters was behaving very girly, the other female character told her to woman up instead of man up. And I found it very interesting. And I see that there's like a big shift around women, actually. We don't need men, we don't need love. We are like powerful queens and all these things. And then on the contrapart of that, I've just watched the how is it called, when the advertising in the US doing the Super Bowl. Super Bowl is the word.
Oh yeah.
So the Super Bowl, is very targeted, the most expensive advertising spots, and many of them, especially the one for cars, were focused on a dad laugh, and the men were showed very emotional. Like there was this ad where dad was sending his daughter to the army. So actually the woman went to the army and the dad was crying in the car. So I see this kind of shift recently, and I wanted to just see what do you think about it, or. if you observe the same more.
Oh yeah, well, a lot can be said about that, and I won't go in detail on that. We can certainly talk about that, you know, after this presentation. But yes, a lot is being said about that, and there are still scholars who talk about, who focus on problematic representations because they do exist. And there are scholars who show this growing complexity that you just talked about. There is one, if you are interested in that, there is one book that I can recommend. It's called Gender in the Media by Rosalind Gill, and she talks specifically about all this research that shows how you know, how problematic it is to make trying to make a conclusion about how the media affect us, and in this sense. And there is a whole this whole field of audience research, reception research, that says, oh, but people are using media text in so many different ways. Like I gave the example with Lara Croft. Even if we can see some representations that are kind of problematic, they also can be interpreted in a very empowering way. But then at the same time, there is something that's being discussed as a co-optation or commodifying all these social justice movements and feminist movements. So representations that seem really progressive, right? But at the same time, they have certain underlying stereotypes that, like women, for example, strong female characters. There's a lot of research on that specifically, that we have a lot of strong female characters that you just mentioned, but most of them are young, are very pretty, often sexual, very openly sexualized, and they are mostly white, you know, they're able-bodied. So yes, we see strong women, but they are allowed to be strong only when they conform to these certain standards. So, but it's just like I'm just scratching the surface of this whole discussion, and if you want, we can certainly continue that.
Great, and I'm sorry, I'll apologize because it's night here in Prague, and I have to go and have dinner. So I'll leave you now, guys. But
thank you so much for. I'm so happy to see you.
Yeah, it was really nice to see you guys as well, and say hi to Renee and everyone. I miss you.
Absolutely.
We will.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. So we have like 2 more minutes. I don't know if Greg, you want to ask a question, or Shahana or Zoe, if you have any.
Well, with each of these people, I can I can have a long discussion offline. So.
Yeah, but now it's recorded. So.
What about Dara? Did she type something?
No, she didn't respond. So she'll ask you, and I put on the post so people might on the web page of the presentation can still ask questions, and you can go back and respond to it.
Okay.
So any closing remarks from our viewers before I let Elizaveta to finish the presentation?
It was a great presentation, Lisa.
Thank you.
Yeah, very well done.
Yeah, I can see that you, Greg, you're supposed to leave at 1.
Yeah, I couldn't.
Was it so interesting that you couldn't go? I hope so.
Yeah, no, it was really great. I have a lot of questions, but we can talk about them later.
Absolutely.
I'll talk about it when I see you. Thank you so much, everyone. Great to see you.
Okay, so again, thank you very much for participating in our first series of the seminars from our scholars. So we're looking forward for our next seminar this Friday at 12. And then you can see on our website we have more upcoming with Shahana, who will present her dissertation research, and Said Tuzel, who will present his research as well. So thank you, Elizaveta, for sharing this amazing presentation, and everybody who joined us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.